Good afternoon, my friends, and welcome back to the next installment of our study of the Old Testament, our survey study of the Old Testament, and really it's going to end up being a survey study of the entire Bible. First thing I want to do before we get started is I want to just open up with a word of prayer. So please join me as we go to the Lord in prayer. Most wonderful and gracious Heavenly Father, once again, we are so grateful that we have the opportunity to go to your holy word, to search out your scriptures, to find out what your heart and mind are. Lord, it is good to know the story that leads to Jesus Christ and ultimately to our reunification with you in the new heaven and the new earth. And so God, today I just ask that you be with us, you guide us, Lord, you open the scriptures to our minds and to our hearts. Lord, quicken our hearts so that whatever we study today, we might not just necessarily keep in our minds, but Lord, that it would find good fertile soil in our hearts, and that it would grow and bear good fruit in our lives and in your kingdom. So Lord, be with us and guide us today. We give you all the honor, all the praise, and all the glory. Amen. Now, dear friends, just a real quick recap of where we're at, where we came from. Remember, I told you that Genesis is really divided into three main chunks or three main periods. We first have the creation period, which is the first couple of chapters, and then we have from chapters 3 to 11, we have the primeval history period, where we kind of see how things moved along. And then God really starts in the book of Genesis focusing in on one family through one man. And so then, well, I say one man, ends up being 4 or 5 men. And we call that the patriarchal period or the fathers. And we're in that patriarchal period of Genesis. And Abraham is who we started learning about last week, or excuse me, not Abraham, Abram. Abram was called by God to leave his home, leave his family, leave everything that he had known his whole life, and to go to this new place where God would show him, and God would end up making a covenant with Abram to be his God, and Abram would belong to him, but also the covenant extended to promise Abram this land where he was going, and also that Abram would be the father of a great nation, that a great people would come from Abram. We saw where, as part of that covenant, God changed both Abram's name and his wife Sarai's name to Abraham and Sarah. There's a lot of meanings in those names, but that's for a whole different study. We'll get into that another time. But just know that God changed their names from Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah. We know that we learned last week that Abraham and Sarah left their homeland, but they brought their nephew Lot with them. Last week we found where Lot and Abram's herds had grown too big. They couldn't coexist, so they parted ways. Lot's now living down in Sodom. Yes, that Sodom, the Sodom from Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham has just been visited by God and angels, the 3 visitors that he met last week. God revealed to Abraham that he's on his way to Sodom and Gomorrah because of some evil down there, and he's about to wipe out the town. Abraham knows that his nephew's Lot lives down there, and so he kind of negotiates a little bit with God and says, hey, you're really going to destroy that place if you find 50 good people? How about 40, 30, 20, 10? It got him, dealed him down to 10, and so now that's where we find ourselves in the story today. So now on to the rest of the story. I told you last week that when the 3 visitors, God and the 2 angels, were there with Abraham, God revealed to Abraham his plan to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham got him to make a deal that if he could find a certain number, I believe the number was 10, of righteous people within Sodom and Gomorrah, that the cities would be spared. So these 2 angels, they go on down to Sodom. When they get down to Sodom, they go, as would be the custom, they go to the city gate, and they find Lot there at the city gate. Now there's something about these men that Abraham saw them and said, now there's something special. And remember, Abraham invited them over for a lunch, and we saw it was a little bit more than just your regular ham and cheese sandwich. It was a very involved feast. So Abraham knew there was something special about these men. Well, his nephew Lot must have sensed the same thing, because they go down to the city gate. Lot sees them, and he immediately insists that they go and stay at his house. And at first they decline. They say, well, thank you for that gracious offer, but we're just going to stay here down in the city center. Now Lot knows that this is a terrible idea, that they are not going to be treated hospitably, that they're in grave danger if they do this. So he insists, he says, please, come stay at my house. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if you didn't come and experience my hospitality. So eventually they relent. They said, all right, we will go and we'll stay at your house tonight. And so he goes, or they go with him, and he prepares them a meal. Now, while they are in that first night there at Lot's house, the men of Sodom know, of course, that these men, these strange new men, have gone to Lot's house. So they all gather up and they go down to Lot's house, and they start beating on the door, start hollering and saying, hey Lot, we know you have those visitors in there. We want you to send them out. We want you to send them out because we want to have sex with them. Don't know of any other way of sugarcoating it, but they are wanting to drag these two visitors out and forcibly have homosexual relations with them. So Lot refuses. Lot's like, look, these men are under my roof. They're under my protection, under my authority. Absolutely cannot send them. Now you guys need to go on about your way. Now the men tried to push their way in. They started beating down the door. They started breaking it down. The angels struck them blind. Angels struck them with an affliction where they were blind, and then they couldn't even find the door. The angel says, look, you know what? This just isn't working. There are no righteous people in this town. Angels tell Lot, listen, you need to get your family together, and you need to get out of town, and you need to do it now, because we have come here to destroy this town and the neighboring town, Gomorrah. Leave town. Don't look back. Don't take anything with you. Don't waste any time. Just go. Lot's like, oh, I don't know. So Lot goes and tells his family, tells his daughters and his daughters' husbands, and the husbands think he's crazy. They think he's joking, and they decide they're not going to go. I don't know if they ever end up going. I don't think they do. But eventually the angels are able to persuade Lot and his wife and his daughters to leave town and to go. And he says, now, don't look back. Run over there to the mountains. Lot says, look, the mountains are too far. Surely the disaster will overtake me before I get there. Look, there's a little town over there. How about if I go to that town instead? How about if I go over there? Now, let's see. Let's see what that, that little town, that's what it was. The little town's name is Zoar. It's not really important to know, but at least not at this point. But he says, look, Zoar is just a little ways down the road. Let's go there, and surely we'll be safe there. And the angel's like, look, whatever, okay, just go. We are about to rain sulfur and fire and brimstone down upon this place. Go, don't look back. And so Lot and his family take off, and they're heading over to Zoar. But what should happen? But Lot's wife should stop and take a look back. And as we know from reading the story today, as soon as she looks back, she is turned into a pillar of salt. Now, I'm not sure what's going on there. I haven't had a lot of time to study that, but I will tell you this. When I was taking a seminary class on the Old Testament back at Duke a few years back, I had a professor, and she was had just finished writing a PhD dissertation on Lot's wife. And just that one little piece of scripture, she wrote a 300-page dissertation on Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. So maybe I need to get a hold of that dissertation and read it to find out what it's going. But for right now, I'm not sure what's going on here. But just know that it has something to do with being disobedient, not doing what God tells you to do. And there are consequences to that. So Lot's wife was told not to look back. She did. The consequences were she returned a pillar of salt. Now, evidently Lot and his two daughters make it to Zoar. And Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. It says, it says next morning Abraham Abraham looked down to the place where Sodom and Gomorrah were, and all he saw was dense smoke rising up. Burning sulfur was rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah out of the heavens, and God overthrew the cities and the entire plain, destroying all those that were living in the cities. Lot and his two daughters eventually leave Zoar, and they settle up in the mountains because he was afraid of staying in Zoar. It doesn't really say why he was afraid, but he was too afraid to stay there. So he goes to the mountains, and they are living in a cave. Now, I'm telling you, the Bible is full of these weird stories, and this is another one of them. So the two daughters start to talk, and the oldest daughter tells the younger daughter, says, look, here we are. Our husbands were destroyed back in Sodom. We've got nobody here to, for us to carry on the family line. We'll have no sons. And the oldest daughter says, look, let's get our father to drink wine. Let's get him drunk. Now, this is almost a throwback to what we saw with the Noah story, where Noah said a man of the vine or man of the vineyard got drunk. Nothing good can happen when you get drunk, at least in the Bible, at least in Genesis so far. So the two sisters get their father drunk, and the older sister goes in and she lays with her father. And the next night, it says, the next day the older daughter said to the younger daughter, last night I slept with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again, and then you can go in and sleep with him, and that way we can preserve our family line through our father. And so the next day the younger daughter does the same thing. They get their father drunk, he passes out, she goes in, has relations with him, and they both end up pregnant. Now, as you might imagine, nothing good can happen, can come from this, from them having sex with their father and getting pregnant. So one of them has a child, and the child is named Moab. And that name will figure in here in a couple of books here in the Bible. So Moab was the leader of the Moabites. The other daughter, she had a child named Ben-Ammon. And Ben-Ammon, or Ben-Ami, was the father of the Ammonites. Both the Moabites and the Ammonites figure prominently into the story trajectory of the Old Testament of the Bible. These are two groups of people that will be despised by God, and the Israelites will later go in and eject them from their territory, and they will take over their territory. So that's how we finish up our time right now with Lot, is with him getting drunk, passing out, his two daughters essentially raping him in that cave, and then bearing his children. Now we're going to go back to Abraham for a little while. Abraham moves on from where he was staying there up in the hills right outside of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he moves on to a new area. The Bible tells us that he moves on to an area called the region of the Negev. Now, in this region of the Negev, this is where the Philistines would have, pretty close to where the Philistines were ruling, and he meets a man there. There's a king named Abimelech. Now, Abimelech will show up again, but right now this is when Abraham's meeting the first time. And he goes there for a while, and Abraham goes back to that same old trick that he used in Egypt because he's scared for his life. Instead of letting everybody know that Sarah is his wife, he goes back to calling Sarah his sister. So Abimelech thinks that Sarah is Abraham's sister, and so he sends some men down there to inquire about her. And so they come down, get her, and take her to go live in Abimelech's household. Now, here we have a king. He's got another man's wife, as you might expect, as has already happened with the Egyptian ruler. God does not look upon this kindly. Now, he does not strike Abimelech down, but God decides to set him straight. And so he comes to him in a dream, and one night, and he tells him, he says, "You're a dead man. You're as good as dead, Abimelech, because the man or the woman that you have taken, she's a married woman. She belongs to somebody else." Now, Abimelech he throws up his hands, as you might imagine, and he goes to defend himself like, whoa, God, let me tell you, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did that woman's husband not say to me, this is my sister? And did not she say to me, this is my brother? Surely I didn't know. I've done all this with a clear conscience and with clean hands. And so God says to him in the dream, he says, yes, I know that you did this with a clear conscience. And because of that, I've kept you from sinning against me. That's why I didn't even let you touch her while she was in your household. Now, return the man's wife to him, because that man's a prophet. He's going to pray for you and you're going to live. You're going to be fine from this. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die. So Abimelech knows what he must do, what he's got to do, and says, early the next morning, Abimelech summons some people, and he brings Abraham, and he calls Abraham. And he calls out Abraham and says, Abraham, what have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you would want to do this to me and bring such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done. You lied to me. You told me this woman was your sister. So I brought her into my household. I was thinking about making her my wife. Abimelech says, what do you have to say for yourself? Why did you do this? And so Abraham, he defends himself. It's still, in my mind, indefensible. But he, just like with the Pharaoh, he says, look, I said to myself, surely these people don't respect or fear God, and they're going to kill me because of my wife. He used that same lame story down in Egypt. He says, oh, Pharaoh, I was so afraid that you were going to kill me because you wanted my wife, and so I just said she was my sister. So we see Abraham, not once but twice, lying and saying that, well, I say lying, we're going to see in a minute, it's really just a half-truth. Just saying that this is not my wife, it's my sister. And so he tells Abimelech, he says, besides, I really didn't lie because she really is my sister. She's the daughter of my father, but not of my mother, which makes Sarah his half-sister. And so Abimelech, it's funny how both the Pharaoh and Abimelech could have dealt with this in a much different way, but the Pharaoh didn't know who Abram was. Abimelech was at least given the hint by God that Abraham was an important man. He said he's a prophet and he's going to pray for you and he's going to bless you. So both the Pharaoh and Abimelech could have killed Abraham, could have run him off, could have done anything, but it says that Abimelech gives Abraham some stuff. He says he brings out sheep and cattle and male and female slaves, gave them to Abraham, returned Sarah, his wife, to him. And then Abimelech says, look, my land is before you, live wherever you want. Whatever you want is yours, just live there. So in return for almost getting Abimelech killed, or even worse, by God, Abraham is richly rewarded by the man that he almost got killed. In return, Abraham prays for Abimelech. He blesses him as one of the consequences of Abimelech bringing Sarah into his household is Abimelech's wife and his female slaves had been made barren by God, and they were unable to conceive because of Abraham's wife Sarah. And so after Abraham prayed to God, God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves to where they could have children. All right, so that's the end of the story of Abraham and Abimelech for now. Now we move on to a promise that we heard about last week, where even in his old age, their old age, Abraham and Sarah, Abraham's like 87 years old when his son Ishmael was born by Sarah's slave Hagar. And God comes back and he says, look, that was not my plan. That was your plan. You did things your way. That's not how I wanted them done. Now we're going to do them my way. Sarah is going to have a son. She is going to bear you a son even in your old age. And if you remember right, one of the angels came and says, the three men that came, God and the two angels that came to see Abraham, they made a promise that within a year that Sarah would be pregnant and have a son. And so in chapter 21 of Genesis, we see it says, the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. And now, the name Isaac means he laughs. And there's two reasons why scholars think that. First is, if you remember right, when Sarah overheard the angel speaking to Abraham and telling him he was going to have, that Sarah was going to get pregnant, she laughed. And remember, the angel says, "What's so funny? Why all the chuckles back there behind the tent?" And Sarah's like, "Oh, that wasn't me." And he's like, "Oh, but it was you laughing." So there's that connection to laughter. But it also says that Sarah, in verse 6 of chapter 21, Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone will hear about this, will laugh with me." So God remembers his promise to Abraham. Sarah has a son. They name him Isaac. But we still can't forget that there's this little issue of Hagar and the illegitimate child Ishmael. You remember when Hagar ran away after Sarah started mistreating her, God sent her back. And so they've been living there. Now, he's just still a little child. He's not that old, not quite a grown man yet. But Sarah gets jealous now that she has her own son, Isaac. She gets jealous of Hagar and Ishmael, and she orders Abraham to send them away. Now, remember, this has got to be a tough call for Abraham because that's his son. Even though it's not with his wife Sarah, it's still his son, his flesh and blood. And so Abraham is distressed, and he goes to God, and God reassures him. He says to him, "Abraham, I want you to do what Sarah tells you to do, because Isaac is the one. Isaac was my plan all along. He is the one that is in the covenant line. That promise that I made with you to make you a great nation and to make your offspring more numerous than the stars in the sky, that's going to come through Isaac. That's not going to come through Ishmael. Ishmael, it was your plan, and that's that. But I will tell you this, because Ishmael is your son, I will make a nation out of him, a great nation, but only because he's your son. But make no mistake, he is not going to be Isaac's equal. Isaac is the one that I've chosen to carry on this line for my plan of redemption." And so Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael away. He gives them some food, he gives them a skin of water, and he sends them off. And so they go out and they start to wander around in the desert. It says the desert of Beersheba. As you might imagine, water does not last all that long in a desert. And so before too long, the water runs out. Ishmael's crying. Excuse me, he's not crying. The water runs out. She knows that they're going to die. So she takes and she sets Ishmael down under one tree, one bush, and it says she goes and sits down a little ways off because she can't bear to watch her son die. And so she sits there and she begins to cry. Evidently, Ishmael was crying, because it says in verse 17, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there." And that angel of God reassures Hagar and says, "Look, he's not going to die right now. God is going to make him into a great nation. You don't have anything to worry about. God made a promise with you. God is going to honor that promise and make him into a great nation. But here's what we're going to do. You're just going to have to kind of stick it out here for a while." And so they find a well. She looks at it. It says she looks up. God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went, filled the skin with water, and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. It says while they were living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife from Egypt. So they're cast out. Abraham sends them out. You would think that that's the end of it. As soon as the water runs out, they're going to die. We see God's wonderful providence at play here. God's like, look, I made promises, I'm going to make sure they're kept. And so we see not only the reassurance of Hagar, that look, God said he was going to handle this, he's going to handle it, but God also provides in a supernatural way when he opens her eyes and she sees this well of water. It says God was with the boy as he grew up. So God was with Ishmael even as he grew up. He lived in the desert, became an archer, and then his mother sends down at the appropriate time to Egypt and gets him a wife. Now, that's the last we're going to hear about Hagar and Ishmael for a while. We're going to finish out this chapter, chapter 21. We're going to call it a day because it's actually perfect time to stop. We'll get into a great story next time we get together. But we go back and we see Abimelech and Abraham once again to finish out the chapter. Abimelech and his commander go to Abraham, and he acknowledges that God is with Abraham. He says, God is with you in everything you do. And as you can imagine, as Abraham as Abimelech sees the hand of God upon Abraham, he starts to get a little fearful. He says, you know, God is with you in everything you do. Swear to me here before God right now that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me in the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness that I've shown you. So he said, look, I think you're going to start to get a little bit big for your britches. Just remember me. Don't lie to me. Don't harm me. Don't harm my descendants. And so Abraham swears to it. He says, that's fine. I can live by that. Then Abraham says, well, while we're talking here, Abimelech, you know, I've got a little bit of a problem. You know, I dug a well out here for my livestock and everything, and some of your servants came along and took it from me. They seized it. Abimelech says, well, I don't know who's done this. This is the first time here, but I'm hearing about it for the very first time this morning. I don't know who has done this. You didn't tell me about it, but I tell you what, I'll look into it. Abraham, in return, brings some sheep and some cattle and gives them probably some of the stock that Abimelech gave him a little while back. But he gives the stock to Abraham, and he set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock. And Abimelech asked Abraham, he says, what's the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you've set apart? He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So Abimelech's kind of hedging on. He said, you know, I kind of look into this. I don't know anything about it. Abraham's like saying, look, I'm telling you the truth. I dug this well. Here are these lambs. I'm swearing on these 7 ewe lambs that I dug this well. And so they made a treaty. The 2 men swore an oath. It doesn't say explicitly that he got the well back, but I'm assuming he does. It says, after the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and his commander returned to the land of the Philistines, and Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And it says, and Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. So what we see is we see kind of a peace treaty right there. We see some stability for Abraham, and that's important because he's going into a period with Isaac, remember the one by which the covenant is going to continue on through, and we're seeing God providing through Abimelech and through this peace treaty a time for them to have that stability as God fulfills his promise to Abraham. Now, that's all we got for this week, but what we have on tap for next week is God decides to give Abraham a little test. And part of that test involves his now one and only son that he's got, now that Ishmael's out of the picture, his son Isaac, the one that God promised to give him. And I won't give you too many of the details and spoil it, but let's just say that he's put between a rock and a hard place. And he is forced to choose whether he's going to obey God and lose that son or be disobedient to keep his son. It's something that I can't imagine any father being asked to make a decision on, but we'll see that and much more next time we get together. So It's been great. Our allotted time is upon us. We've covered a good bit of ground. Once again, I want to remind you that you only get out of Bible study what you put into it. So take a little time, go back. Let's see, we went through about 3 chapters. We only made it through 3 chapters today. Go back, review those 3 chapters. You should be able to read that in about 10 minutes. Pray over it and dig into some of the finer details that I didn't get a chance to cover. If you would like, before we get together again, go on to chapter 22, maybe 20 through to 25, where we see chapter 25 is where Abraham dies, and we kind of change gears. So look over those chapters, and when we come together again, you'll be better prepared for the stories that you're going to hear. Once again, thank you for joining us. I know this is not as intimate as being together sitting around this table in person. We are here in the fellowship hall where I normally hold the Bible studies at North Church. Hopefully we'll be back here fellowshipping and feasting on God's Word again soon. But until that happens, this will have to be the way we gather. And I thank you for taking time to watch the study. And join us again next time we get together as we continue to hear more of God's wonderful Word. Amen. Hey folks, remember to click the subscribe button below and ring the bell to be notified when we post new content. And as always, if today's video touched you in some way, please hit the thumbs up button and leave us a comment. We love to hear how our content impacts your walk with Jesus Christ. Until next time, God bless.